This is the Almost Daily Zencast. Hello and Namaste. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode. I am your humble host, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. Let's get started.
How do you jumpstart healing? That was the center of the idea that prompted me today. How do we jumpstart the healing? All the usual advice is sound. Exercise, meditate, pray, improve your diet. I mean, that alone will jumpstart your healing. But that shit is hard, right? And also, it's not that it's hard. People are overwhelmed because they have received little to no guidance about those things until they decide to seek them out. And everyone's always looking for something easier, something simpler, something less hard, less complicated, less taxing. What are we to do about that? Turn inwards and abandon all. That's an obtuse statement, isn't it? Turn inwards and abandon all. We don't like the word abandon, not in our current psychological societal context. We have abandonment issues. We have trauma from being abandoned. And so when we are told to turn around and abandon everything else in return, how do we reconcile that? I like the word abdicate because it implies just a setting down. You're not leaving it. You're not getting rid of it. You're not neglecting it. You're just setting it down. We have a calling, as I like to say, and that calling is to heal ourselves and through that be able to heal each other and through that be able to heal the whole species. And the reason it's difficult to talk about, the reason I've gone 3 parts at like 40 plus minutes each is because words don't contain that content. The key, the secret, the ingredient, the thing that we need in order to jumpstart our healing cannot be defined in words, cannot be labeled with terminology, cannot be conceived of in the traditional sense of conceiving of things with word-based ideas. And yet here we are. Here I am, trying to give you a word salad that gets you there. The best we can do, as Alan Watts reminds us, as anybody who's ever really deeply studied Zen and written about it or talked about it or shared about it in any way, reminds us, they've all stopped and said, oh wow, this shit's kind of really hard to talk about because words fail. Let's just try to point in the right direction. They remind us that we are not tending to the garden inside of our hearts. We are not attending to the fertile soil within our imagination. We are not nourishing or cultivating the growth that can only happen deep within in that unnameable space behind our identity, behind our feelings, behind everything that is the normal stuff that we take for granted about our internal world. We need to dig deep, deeper than we've ever dug. And I mean everybody. The Dalai Lama to that schmo that's never even heard of meditation. Each in our own way, each in our own time, each with our own network of associates and friends and family that will support us and that we will support. In terms of practical action, right? Because that's what everybody really wants. No one wants ephemeral guidance to look within, because we're all feeling really agitated about everything that's going on out there. But that's the key to the whole fucking clusterfuck. Everything that is going on out there is a symptomology of what's going on inside. Now, nobody wants to take responsibility. No one wants to take the blame or take on the mantle of saying, I am responsible for Donald Trump. Right? Except for those who are in alignment with his ego and his ego agenda. Sure, I'm sure lots of people who are as cuckoo as Trump is in the same way and for the same reasons, they might want to be like, yeah, Donald Trump, it's me, I did that. But let's reel back here. Let's digress back to the core of the question. Jumpstarting the healing. Why? Because we need to heal ourselves and heal each other, heal the species, therefore heal people like Donald Trump and all those people whose names we do not even know, hiding in the shadows. How do I know that that's the case? Look around you, look through history, and you will find an interesting pattern. Millions upon millions upon millions of monetary units, whichever, dollars, etc., have been spent. Blood has been shed to keep you from knowing that God is you. Don't believe me? Read some books. Look back through history. Connect the dots and dig beneath that which is being discussed. Most books are there to discuss the mundane details of how the wars were played out, how the corruption was apparently stopped by the system of justice, etc., etc. And as they say, forgive me, I'm slurping hot tea because my throat got a little surprised that I was going to podcast all day today. And it's starting to give out, my voices. Throughout history, we are reminded that history is preserved or written by the winners, and therefore very skewed and biased in their favor. But there are many resistance fighters, there are many critics of history, there are many alternative voices that draw our attention to the crucial facts that the winners don't want us to pay attention to. I've visited this theme before, right? Empire always butchers the witch doctors and the shamans and the healers and the midwives first when they invade an indigenous people and try to oppress them. Empire always detaches us from nature, in as brutal way as it possibly can. Because nature is alive, and it speaks that wordless language of understanding. And it's easy to fall in love with that cynicism. It's easy to laugh at people who want to hug trees. Tree hugger. That isn't a compliment. You're a tree hugger. That's a put down. That's an insult. But go hug a tree. Like a good one, a big fat one. One that isn't bound by concrete in the middle of a sidewalk. Go hug, actually hug those too because they need it as much as any other tree. But if you want to feel the energy, the power, the glory, the truth, go on a hike. Don't go too far out in the wilderness on your own because that's how people get lost. Speaking of, I want to interject a real life personal moment without disclosing anybody's names, as always. On the Facebooks, there was someone who's, to me, in my opinion, I don't know how they think of me because we don't know each other in person, and we exchange a lot of words, and we've spoken to each other on threads. We've never really had deep chats in the inbox, but we've always been cordial and polite, and we challenge each other's ideas. But this friend, this acquaintance, this Facebook acquaintance, went camping by themselves, bless their heart, to go and disconnect and unplug. Now, they didn't make a mistake, they didn't do anything wrong, and unless someone's fucking with us, they're fine, and they've reported and checked back in finally. But the culmination of circumstances and the fact that they were by themselves led many people, especially members of her family, to lose their shit recently because she wasn't around and she wasn't responding with her telephonic device to requests for confirmation. And apparently there was some technical problem or something because she was supposed to check in on the regular. And now, I don't know if there's some foul play in terms of starting a rumor or something like that, although that idea has been kicked around. But my point was, I want to express some gratitude. That friend who went on a sojourn in nature and was, to the best of my understanding, really unplugged to the point that it alarmed her friends and family and her circle of online friends and family. She's back. She's checked in. She's made a declarative, affirmative post that everything's fine, nothing went wrong, there was no injury done, and what a sigh of relief, right? And I just want to express gratitude for that. Why? Because that heals. There's a lot of things we can do that doctors may or may not, have on their list of recommended actions that are healing. And taking even the smallest of moments to express gratitude brings profound healing, especially if it becomes a practice, something we don't just do a little bit absent-mindedly here and there, or because we've been called out to do it by circumstances or by someone's request. When we make it a practice every day to be grateful, that brings us cathartic healing. That's how we can start this global healing that we are called to participate in. Many of us already do, right? I kind of half-assedly forget to do it sometimes, but that's why I'm doing this episode. Not just for your sake, my friends, but for my own. That my own words may remind me of what I'm supposed to be doing. So expressing our gratitude. I'm sure there's a couple of other things on the list. Expressing our gratitude, expressing our love. If you're in a partnership, express your romantic love. Go out of your way to say I love you. That's a fucking stereotype, especially here in America, that men won't tell their women or their partners. Nowadays, it's sort of meaningless to assume that it's a woman, right? To use that kind of language. Everybody's partnering in all kinds of arrangements, and that's great. Because love is love. Love is supposed to be unconditional. Now, obviously, for practical purposes, we must put some limits on it, right? But let's not get cynical about love. Let's zoom out and look at love at its whole, in its most holistic sense, in its most divine sense. Expressing love on the daily basis heals you. It's hard. When was the last time you told your family that you loved them? I'll be honest. It's been a bit since I told my dad that I love him. Not because I've avoided him, but because we don't talk very often. But this past several years that he and I have been growing closer together instead of further apart, I have been making an effort to consciously remind myself when I get absent-minded about it. Be like, hey, I gotta make an effort to go do that. Is he listening to the show? I don't know. One of the most painful things he said to me, and my father, I'm not trying to shit talk him right now, but my father has said some painful things. Things that I'm sure were horrible, horrible ego traps that he fell into, and that he probably now sort of unconsciously, maybe even consciously regrets. I don't know. I'm not predicting his mind. I'm not pretending to know it fully. But he has expressed that sort of thing to me as we've grown closer over the years. And recently, right? Yeah, it's hard. And some days you don't want to love stuff. Some days you just need to get through the day. Some days you're under stress and under duress and under deadline for work. You got to get shit done. Excuse me. Some days you're too caught up in your own entertainment, right? Some days you're just present and in the moment, and so present and so in the moment that if others aren't immediately around, it's easy to allow them to not be the focus of the spotlight of thoughts in our minds. Each of those examples are different in their nature and in their impact. But returning to that practice of reminding ourselves to express our love, our agape, right? Because we've got one word for love, and that's obviously really cynically attached to sex. It's a whole nother episode. So I'm really grateful, right, for this, for that, these objects, these people, these circumstances. I love you, them, these objects, these circumstances. What's another? The things usually come to me in threes, and here we go. Here's the hard one. Here's the hard pill to swallow. Forgiveness. 3,000 years after Jesus Christ died on a cross, according to the mythos, and taught us to forgive, according to the true parts of his teachings, we have a really hard time forgiving. And trust me, I know from direct personal experience. I have begged for forgiveness and have been coldly told no. And I have been begged for forgiveness and have struggled to say yes. But those three things sit at the core of all spiritual teachings. All true, genuine, meaningful, powerful, effective spiritual teachings, whether they be a physical practice or a mental practice, and whether the narrative of those teachings or those wisdoms overtly call out these three words. If you dig deep and you engage in those practices, you'll understand that they are present. Forgiveness, gratitude, love. We live in a world where those three things are mocked, ridiculed, and marginalized, and openly dismissed by many, many, many people. And it's easy to objectify them and call them haters, right? It's easy to lump them together in a group and slap a big dismissive label on them, right? We do that to Trump supporters all the time. The deplorables. Doing that is explicitly the opposite of forgiving them, of loving them, and of finding things to express gratitude for them, about them. And if the greatest urgent issue of our time, the most urgent catastrophe of our given moment is Donald Trump, and we're struggling to figure out what to do about him, I have a crazy suggestion, right? And I hate to sound like a broken record. Let's set aside our ideological biases. Let us set down the conditioning that has been spoon-fed to us and shoved down our throats, and let us love unconditionally that silly, greedy, power-hungry man. Let us forgive him. As hard as that sounds, let us forgive him. And what on earth could possibly be found to be grateful about him? Trust me, it's there. It's there because I've experienced it already inside myself. So I'll share it with you in the first person. I express my gratitude for Donald Trump being in the position that he's in, because that has led me to a new level of awareness. Dealing with, coping with my mammalian brain's emotional reaction to his absurdity has challenged me deeply and has facilitated me in evaluating where I am in my life. And for that, I am grateful. That's his role, cosmically speaking. That's his calling, spiritually speaking, to be the bad and the ugly, so that we may rise up and be the good. Earlier in Good Morning Trumptopia, I honored and spent some time talking about the Congresswoman whose name totally just fell out of my head. I had it visually in my head a moment ago. Now I can't recall what it was. Forgive me. But she said, do not take the bait. I guess my discussion here is an extension of that, right? Not only must we not take the bait, that's the first step. Then we must unleash our own power to love him, forgive him, and be grateful that this, as scary as it is, and as painful and as traumatic as it is for many of us, well, fuck all of us, be grateful that it's happening, because without it, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Without it, we wouldn't be reevaluating our lives in the way that we are. Without it, we wouldn't be confronted with the challenge of healing our own brothers and sisters the way we are now. See, the system of oppression has a very clear agenda: to get Americans to waste time, energy, both mental and spiritual, and effort, both mental and spiritual, in debate, in argument, in hating each other, in fighting each other, in victimizing each other, in brutalizing each other. And like I've said, as much as we don't want to agree, both sides are lashing out with emotional violence. Both sides are lashing out with physical violence. Not absolute, but, in a relative example to each other. And both sides of these divides, both sides of this conflict, there are those of us going, I don't like what anybody's doing. I need to do something else. And in both camps, there are people who are waking up to the nonsense that politics really is. In both sides, there are people looking up to their leaders going, the fuck? You're not doing what I asked you to do. And in both sides, there is outrage. My message to everyone on all sides is, do not let that outrage become inner rage. Do not let your frustration and anger become virulent hate. Because what we're being asked to do is jumpstart a massive process of healing. And it ain't going to happen tomorrow. It's not going to be done next week. It's going to be challengingly slow and subtle. And also alarmingly instant once it's all said and done. Earlier, and I meant to reference it, but I realized I was running out of time. Well, not running out of time. Going on too long in my time. But in that article by that psychotherapist or psychiatrist, whichever the right label is, labels, but very little understanding in terms of just how we often misuse labels. But she, in a different article, somewhere on a blog, she's got a blog and she writes for other blogs, and I don't remember where, but I was reading some of her content. She was discussing synchronicity, and she was also discussing evolution. And she was comparing and contrasting two models. They're like the two primary prevailing models of evolution. Incremental, and I can't remember the name of the other, but it represented the movement in phases and plateaus. I wish I had still had that up so I can give you the most accurate label. For future self, I'm putting a pin in this so we can do a whole nother episode about it later on. Okay, so she had two graphs to represent that. Incrementalism, or an incremental chart, would essentially be a slope, right? From left to right, there'd be a gradual expression of elevation across the chart, whether in a very steep straight line or in a curved slopey line. Either way, those two would be incremental. The other one, whose label I can't remember right now, something to do with phases and tableaus or something. But the other one was more like a ladder. Instead of a straight line going up over time, or a slopey, curvy line in one, concave curve going up over time, this was in segments. A burst going up, and then a plateau going straight across time, and then a burst going up, and then a plateau going straight across time. I humbly propose to you that those things, a bit like duality, non-duality, or up and down, left and right, those things are not mutually exclusive. Now, I don't remember if she was trying to argue that one is better than the other. I don't think she was. We'll go back to that article someday and do a whole episode on it, because it was really, really fascinating. I just didn't read it all. I just skimmed through it, try to get a general sense of what it was about. But as I've talked on many occasions, either here in the podcast or out on social media, people are confused by this notion that duality is the opposite of non-duality. Whether you're spiritual or you're talking about it in physics or you're just expressing it in social terms, people are confused, I would humbly suggest, because they are convinced that the two cannot coexist. And therefore there must be some raging debate going on about which one is right. I don't think there is such a division. I think the two mutually arise. The two co-create each other. And thus, this idea of evolution being either segmented or unified, either infinitely subtly slow or sporadically quick in bursts and then absences, those two extremes just represent the two ends of the polemic, or rather the two bow tie maximal arcs of the infinity loop that is the one whole integrated unified method of evolution. And arguably, our own inner processes are like that. So, jumpstarting healing. Change is hard. We are lazy. But incremental steps help us achieve long-term momentum. Perfection that's another thing that I've completely blanked on her name. Forgive me. I was just talking about her not 3 hours ago, and I can't remember her name right now. But this psychiatrist had a post on her Instagram, which was an adaptation of a previously expressed bit of wisdom, whom I could not nail down who said it originally first, but her interpretation of it was really good, to the best of my ability to remember it right now. Perfection is the enemy of growth. And something else. Was it healing? It might have been growth and healing. I might be butchering the quote, but it definitely was. Perfection is the enemy of two things that are good for you. And forgive me for my brain being that wishy-washy at times. It just is. Mostly because I feel I'm being called to move forward. Also, I'm running long in the tooth here with this final segment of this 3-part episode. Jumpstart your own healing. Forgive yourself. Jumpstart your own healing. Express gratitude about yourself. Jumpstart your own healing. Rediscover or relearn or teach yourself how to unconditionally love yourself. Loving yourself is not vain. Loving yourself is not wrong. Loving yourself is cathartic and healing. Remember, there's love, and then there's a bunch of things that sort of sound like love but are actually not. That's why we need more sophisticated language. Going back to that point I was making earlier in a previous segment, our language is dumbed down. Our words have been flattened immensely over time. We used to have many words for love. Now we just got this one word that is really cynically associated with fucking. Unfuck yourself, the way that one meme goes. Unfuck yourself. Find a way to get back to that place you were before the world fucked you. How do you do that? Through forgiveness, through compassionate, unconditional love, and through acknowledgement of that which you are grateful in yourself. Another way of stating gratitude is acceptance. We are often agitated because we cannot accept that which we are, and thus we feel pain. But that's a distraction. We are more than what we imagine ourselves to be because our society limits and feeds us a bunch of nonsense about what we are not. And thus we cannot perceive ourselves fully. We cannot understand ourselves completely. We're bound up with this idea of how we are unworthy or not beautiful enough or not smart enough or all these things that we are not enough of. That's where we start. I often come across the question, I don't know how to get started with meditation, and I'm sure I've addressed this in previous episodes. But this just happened again over the weekend. I'm scrolling through the face of books, and or the books of faces, and there was someone was on posting on a group that I am a member of, giving a little too much personal context that isn't really necessary in terms of answering the question, and then asking, how do I do this? Where do I go? And this is a spiritual membership group, right? This is a group about spirituality. No one had answered her question yet. And I just, meditation, my one word. I'm just like, okay, how do I do that? There's a lot of practices out there. There's a lot of schools of thought out there. But at its core, meditation is really about rediscovering how to be at home inside your own skin. And is that not at the very heart of the trauma we all experience? That's the trauma we all are influenced by or oppressed by. The trauma we all carry within ourselves is deeply associated with, if not attached to, if not even maybe caused by, the unfortunate reality that we seem unable to be satisfied with what is available to us as we are within ourselves. Why is that? In large part, I think, and this is difficult to put into words, I think that we think often that our society inaccurately leads us to conclude at a very young age that there is nothing more inside ourselves than the little voice that rambles all the time and screams about the things they're afraid of and screams at us for the things we've done wrong and screams about the things that we do not have. That chatterbox is just the tiniest pinprick of the tip of the iceberg of what's going on within us. But somewhere, somehow, we became convinced that that's all that exists inside of us. And that, my friends, I tell you, is not true. That's where we start. That's where we jumpstart this healing process that will transcend our political emergency. That is where we start the process that will reform the chaos we are living through by giving ourselves permission to even hope that there is more to us inside ourselves than our voices of fear and dissatisfaction and discontent. That's why one of the very first memes I ever made reads, "Look within. The revolution resides inside you." I can't even recite my own memes correctly. What's that? How does it go? I think it's just the revolution is within you or something. But you get my point. I'm not going to waste time looking it up now. I should be wrapping this up here. Healing is the calling. Through healing, we will find all the solutions that we need. Go ahead and argue with that. Name a problem and tell me that healing cannot address it. Some obvious examples that people might jump to is, well, economics. We can't fix economics with healing. Of course we can. Why is our economy fucked? Because people in positions of power, people with mountains of capital, are traumatized. Mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and yes, even physically. For there are parts of our physicality we don't acknowledge that are not bone and blood, but that are still physical and have to do with our body, separate from our mind and independent from our spirit. Because our body itself is alive, right? We are not our body. That's a cliche. Everybody has heard that. It's in Fight Club, right? It's one of the most profound, truest teachings. You are not your body. Your body is with you. Your body, in and of itself, is its own thing, its own vessel of life, its own living vessel of life. That which we are is the culmination, the convergence, there's other words there I'd love to use, but they're not coming to me, so forget them, we'll skip them. The totality of us is this mess of things combined and working in harmony. Mind, body, spirit, right? We're used to talking about that. We can easily analyze, pick apart, and literally dissect the body. And yet we cannot perceive, at least we couldn't until really rather recently, we could not perceive some of the more subtle aspects of the physical body, like chakras and ley lines. Those are real. I went through my own period of doubt. And then I sat in a cutting-edge biology class where a professor that was personally doing investigative research into what's the ancient practice where they put the needles in you? Acupuncture. This professor of biology he was a professor of biology and something to do with nutrition. One of those specific period, study. Anyways, his labels don't matter. But he was a doctor and a professor. And he was one of those working scientists there, teaching 101 class, but also, stepping into a lab and doing high-end science a few floors up. He was sharing, as part of the content in that class, his own published results in finally figuring out a technology to detect what happens inside us when acupuncture is used to facilitate healing. So there are parts of the body we have yet to figure out how to understand, how to measure, but can be measured. That's always been true, right? There was a time in human history we didn't know what our digestive tract looked like. But we knew that if you put food in the one hole, poop came out the other, right? That's always been true. But we didn't know the details. We didn't know the fine lines. We didn't have enough granularity in our understanding to go, oh, well, there's an esophagus, and then there's this bit, and there's the stomach, and the gallbladder, and we just didn't know. It wasn't until we decided it was okay to cut up dead people to be like, well, what the fuck is going on in there? That we started to learn and understand. And we have to do the same thing in terms of our internal phenomena, because the body must be interacting with the mind, and the mind and the body must be connected and interacting with the soul in order for the whole complete phenomena to be as it is. Even though, as I often like to talk about, it is currently operating in its like bare minimum mode of operation. We're really starved. We're really oppressed, not just out there externally in practical terms. We have literally been oppressed into the most, what's the word I'm looking for? Into the most flattened out, limited, incomplete baseline, just barely thriving to fulfill its function level of operation. We are dehumanizing ourselves. And for what? So that some of us can be bazillionaires 17,000 more times over? That's what they want. That's what they're addicted to. That's what they're hiding from us. That's why they're hiding from us. And that's why they want us to be distracted by violence, by killing ourselves and each other, by fighting ourselves and each other. So if I was asked right now, it's 42 minutes in, right? Here it is. 3 segments and 40 some odd minutes each. How do we jumpstart this healing process? We need to stop everything. We need to stop fighting. We need to stop hating. We need to stop criticizing. We can return to it in a hot minute. Don't worry. There's still a lot of talk to be had. But we need to take the moment, once a day, to pause and set everything down. Everything. Our political identity, our opinions, our anger, our pride, our very internal identities. Set them down. Make a little shelf. Create a sacred space to put them in so you can go back and pick them back up again. But set them down. And then focus inwards. And then facilitate your crazy chatterbox to do the same. Right? Because everybody knows that guy that wrote that article about that new massage meditation pillow and app. Talked about like, whoa, my brain, I just can't show everyone. I've done a whole episode about this. The most common, I don't think it was a whole episode, but I've talked about it in a previous episode. The most common thing that people who do not practice meditation say when asked, why don't you practice meditation, is, well, I just can't stop my mind from doing what it does. You don't have to. As long as you set your intention of setting everything down, and then literally sit down or lay down. Sitting down is a little bit more powerful because you are less likely to like doze off into a nap. But napping and sleeping after meditation is not wrong. In fact, sometimes that's exactly what the body needs because we are all exhausted. Every last one of us, even the rich and wealthy, are exhausted. We are malnourished, dehydrated, spiritually starved. And in order to reconcile that, in order to fix that, in order to improve that, we need to do this. We need to create a new ritual of stopping, just stopping everything, if only for 9 minutes. I like that number because I like numbers in threes. Take the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo's 999 challenge. Work your way up from 1 minute a day to 9 minutes a day. Oh God, that's mind-blowing. That's so hard to do. And just do not. Don't try to control your mind. That doesn't help. Don't try to silence your mind. That doesn't help. Just sit down and allow yourself, through your intention, to let go of things, to put them down. Turn your attention inward and use those 3 ingredients: gratitude, love, and forgiveness. You don't need a mantra. Mantras help for sure. But you don't need to pay a guru to teach you some fancy schmancy mantra. Ancient words may carry more power than modern words. That's a truth. So yeah, we may want to pay some well-informed guru to teach us these more ancient and not very well known words with sonic power. But we'll do another episode where we dive into that in more depth. But I'm telling you, you don't need those to get started. We don't need those products to jumpstart the healing process. We may want to support each other through the bartering or exchanging commercially of money for products, whether it's in a spiritual market or not. That can be great. But we don't need it. It is not required. What is required is your willingness to look inside, to hear and listen inside, to feel inside, to perceive inside, and confront that very frightening idea that there's absolutely nothing there. Because nothing is something, and there's more something than nothing inside of us. Let's leave it there for today. Thank you, as always, for tuning in. Namaste. If you have questions, if you have comments, if you have critiques, if you have love to share, if you've got hate to share, find me on the social webs. Mr. Zeppo, wherever I am, it's always Mr. Zeppo. I don't have 17 different names on the internet. I have one because I want you to be able to communicate with me. If you're on a platform that I haven't heard of, find me on another platform and tell me about that other platform. But more interestingly, let's finish the show today with what I meant to start the show today and totally didn't. Join me in a brief and silent moment, very tiny, tiny moment. Join me. You've listened so far, almost an hour's worth of listening. Join me in 1 minute of silence, and then 1 minute of letting some music wash over us, right? And we're gonna do that right now. Namaste, my friends. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for spending 2 minutes with me seeking that inner space. Thank you for sharing those 2 minutes in gratitude, in unconditional love, and in forgiveness for ourselves, for each other, and for the entire human species.
And that is what I've got to say about that. As always, thank you kindly for listening. This has been the Almost Daily Zencast with your humble host, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. Until next time, may peace, love, and grooviness blossom in your heart.